David WILCOCK, and why you should not listen to the loud voices telling you what to do in your thoughts that are not you. David WILCOCK was born March 8th, 1973, and when I first heard of him, he had already become a New York Times best-selling author of fascinating reads like The Synchronicity Key, which I looked through, and he did a huge series on the History Channel and Gaia TV, and he was basically your New Age, New Cage, Ascension teacher superstar of the early 2000s. I learned such interesting things as he said over 70% of the pharmaceuticals companies are owned by the Rothschilds of England, and other such related interesting facts. And the police report says he called the cops and they caught him playing around with a gun and he shot himself. Of course, this story doesn't make any sense from the perspective of his personality, of his zodiac sign, his ascension teachings. But it makes a whole lot of sense from the perspective of the false self, of someone who listened to the voices, who took the voices very seriously. Now, WILCOCK also had such nefarious Age of Pisces tactics as having sources. He would use his YouTube weekly lives, his PowerPoint presentations to explore Q drops and the idea that Trump was a white hat rescuer. And obviously, David WILCOCK had a huge narcissist hero, New Age, I'm going to single-handedly save the world grandiosity. And honestly, all of this got so bad that the last 5 years at least, I've only looked at his shows a few times, and they were so cringe that I couldn't really handle it looking at it. And worse, the most recent experiences I've had checking out his show or watching the Truth Seekers channel, watching Stephen Cambrian break down what a lying grifter he was. And so after he supposedly self-exited with the handgun, this story narrative didn't really sound believable to me. So I watched a few videos of people talking about it, and the person Stephen Cambrian calls Crazy Carrie Cassidy said, David was the 13th of these scientists that disappeared, that, because he had contracts with Free Energy. He even said several years ago that he was going to do a 0-point car company, and I thought, well, maybe that would be the factory job I'd actually be willing to take, and nothing came of it. His predictions more and more became perceived by the public certainly to be inauthentic, as they didn't ever play out. The idea of Trump as a white hat rescuer and predecessor to that, which led to that, the idea of the QAnon is real. And for years and years, for maybe a decade, maybe nearly a decade, I noticed that he had slipped off, that he had slipped into fantasy land, into what the Buddhists call the mode of delusion. And one of the last really beautiful transmissions I saw him make was with Danny and Brinkley when I was evacuated from this place due to the CZU fires. I was back at my sibling's house in Charleston, and he actually put an image of a Tibetan Lama's rainbow body in a robe in a shadow box on the wall of a monastery in Tibet. An image that I don't think we've ever been privy to here in the U.S. before David did that. And that was really cool. But since then, it's just been, like I say, his whole show was just cringe to me. And especially since I've, kind of had a parting of ways with the president's great-granddaughter, who also wants to rescue us all with this idea of ascension, planetary ascension, personal ascension. And so then I watched the Beyond Mystic channel, who's friends with Jay Widener, who was the producer of the Breakthrough, the Gaia TV series. And if I'm not getting the story mixed up, he paid everyone equal, including David, who was the superstar, but he was already having money problems then. And so he said, well, maybe if you just do 2 shows, I can pay you twice. And then he brought in Corey Good. And if, you know what, the first moment I ever saw Corey Good talk, I got a bad feeling. Negative energy. And what Jay Widener said is that, and then they had a clip of Cliff High saying it even more succinctly, is that Cliff has actually had won a lawsuit against Corey Good, or he calls him Corey Butthead Good. And of course he has to be called good because he seems to be pure evil, a pure narcissist psychopath. That, you know what, if you had only heard of the secret space soldier idea, concept through Corey Good, his sphere being Alliance channel and grift, then naturally you would think the whole entire thing is fake. Is it fake? I don't know. Although I was in the gifted and talented program in elementary school, I don't recall ever being shipped off to extra secret facilities to train in psychic powers, although it did train in your math, advanced physics. So David WILCOCK, I mean, anyone could see that he really wanted to help the world awaken, at least in the early days. He wrote these great fat books that were supposed to help you get enlightened and ascend, and but he got married and his wife left him, and I don't know, in the course of a year or two, or very short duration. And it seems that Widener said that she made a statement that it was because of Corey Good. So basically, both Jay Widener and Cliff High said that Corey Good triangulated David, isolated him, encouraged him to buy that $1 million house in Nederland, Colorado, and encouraged him definitely to grift, to make money off lies, predictions, scams. And then he invested in this aerospace company that ripped him off of $1.5 million. So But the thing is that was most radically apparent to me as to what, whether he was, secretly taken through a portal to another dimension like some of these scientists, or whether he killed himself or arranged for the witness relocation program or whatever happened. The reason why, they say he owed the IRS, a couple $1 million, and he was worried about that, and he didn't have the rent. But he was making, Stephen Cambrian said on his last live stream, he made $2,500 in super chats. With my Pisces moon, I couldn't be more the mirror exact opposite of David Wilcock. I mean, I would like to awaken people and help to free them from the wheel of samsara, get them off the loose farm prison planet, but I'm not willing to lie, to grift. And the exact opposite way, my friend Brandon, whose channel is called Natural Born Talents, David Wilcock, makes me not want to learn PowerPoint, not want to write books, because if I became a successful book writer, if Miguel Connor loved me and had me on his show and I was one of the crew at Aeon Byte, it would be so easy to slip into hubris, to slip into hero narcissism, to slip into grandiosity. And I have to, that's part of my shadow work. I have to get over the disgust of success, the disgust of making money, tearing down the matrix. And I agree with the Real People channel that it's not really appropriate to make money helping people to wake up from the system. But David Wilcock was a great writer and a very talented presenter. He had the advanced equipment. He would use 3 angles on his live streams, but more and more, he was saying nothing. But what came through was narcissistic, false self, hubris, garbage, false predictions, grifting, personality grifting. And I don't think anyone was more hoodwinked than David himself. This is why, like I say, it became more and more of a cringe that I couldn't even stand to watch, and a guilty pleasure to tune into Truth Seekers several occasions and watch Stephen tear it down to shreds. So, but it began to get really bad. Some point, maybe prior to 2020, that he believed he was channeling Archangel Michael. Now, if you follow my recent videos, since sin's God is love, since sin's God is hate and fear, use them to gut your false self. Well, I wish I could give this, my series of videos on that to David Wilcock, but, maybe it's too late. I'm not certain that he took himself out. I'm not saying I believe that. But what I will say is that I have been to the Denver International Airport, and I have been to the Denver International Airport when I drank a whole lot of cannabis tincture and really felt deeply into it. I've seen, 8-foot tall people there like I've seen around here. And, there's those like Alex Collier. There's those that claim that it's 10 stories deep, that there's a Draco reptilian base all up under the Denver airport. And as I've said previously, over the years, I've grown more and more unsubscribed. I've grown more and more opposed. I've gotten away from the New Cage movement entirely. But that doesn't mean I don't think there's a lot of truth in some of it. And there seems to be more shooting sprees around Denver, Boulder, Central Colorado per capita than anywhere. And, I think that an entity was in possession to some degree of his mind. We know the CIA has V2S, voice to skull, All the way from that to what I say is the narcissistic predator entities, the archonic possession of someone with the false self. Now, David had a lot of grandiosity. He really felt that he was the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, the famed psychic. And other people have said it, but have you ever noticed how whenever whether it's a psychic reader or a famous or a public speaker, when they talk about their past life, they were always someone famous? Well, Jay Widener and Cliff High said that Corey Good basically triangulated David using his grandiose hero narcissism into that corner in the mountaintop of Colorado, and that was it. And so, but from my perspective, it was the false self. It was the archonic, the voices that Jerry Marzinski has exposed, the other shooters, the school shooters, they're all the same. David had become possessed by the voices of the El, the deceiver, the Elohim, Yahweh. And no, my friend who's the Gnostic Christian named Mikhail, maybe you ought to consider changing your name, because that L could be why you're telling me they're good. Phonetics, the powers of spelling, magic, words. The idea that David was such a well-loved writer and speaker, conference presenter, that he could make thousands of dollars a week on super chats on a YouTube live just using his PowerPoint and his narcissistic hubris and fake predictions that, well, maybe David and whoever else was involved saw that they needed to end this what had turned into a big grift. I mean, you see in the beginning, like so many others, David WILCOCK had a good intention. He was going to enlighten the world. He was going to help planetary ascension, help us to personally ascend. But you see, it's like he never did the shadow work or even knew to do it. He was never humble enough to look in the mirror and say, what is going wrong? What has happened? What has happened? What has gone wrong? I mean, just as I was getting ready to make this video, my folding chair broke. The metal broke and fell apart. Right before I was going to make this. And it got me to thinking about how, for some reason, the false self doesn't want me to make this video. The planned obsolescence that has been programmed into objects and spirits and flesh sacks in this realm is profound. And David WILCOCK was no different. Maybe the letter agencies and the higher ups felt that his mission was over, But the thing is that, again, whatever happened, or he stepped through a portal, or he faked his death, or he actually killed himself, either way, what led to that was David WILCOCK was someone who took the commanding voices very seriously. And this is something, behavior that is promoted in the algorithm on YouTube and on internet. And it was also due to being in an extremely abusive, narcissistic trauma bond with Corey Good, obviously. And so that's all it takes. So don't let it happen to you. If you think that you are channeling, watch out for what Tony Sayers called the dump in the punch bowl. Watch out. I read all of the Seth materials by Jane Roberts. She was supposedly channeling the biblical Seth, and they were great. Some of them had great information, the nature of personal reality, and in my 30s, I read all of them pretty much. And Jane Roberts her mom was on welfare and sick growing up, and then her husband wrote it down. They started with the Ouija board, just like the tragic end and beginning and end of Tracy Twyman. Playing around with channeling entities is very, very dangerous. And just like my mommy or anyone else conservative would have told me in the beginning, it happens to be true. I don't know if you could tell me of an entity that was channeled. I'm sure there are some who didn't do evil things to those who channeled them. But Seth told Jane, hey, it's okay to have a beer and cigarettes in the afternoon and evening. And she died of rheumatoid arthritis at age 59. Was that related to this idea that it's okay to have beer and cigarettes? Well, I think those studies have shown that those exasperate this kind of illness, weakening the immunity system. So, yeah, this has been what I've noticed after, say, 20 years of reading different channeled books, maybe 15 years here and there, not consistently, is that they always give you some deep spiritual insight and then some control or then something to harm you. But David WILCOCK is the most egregious, obvious example of this. How over the years, his personality, his ego was growing and growing, and narcissism and hubris growing and growing and growing, whereas he was having to beg on his live stream chats. He was, going broke. He didn't have the money to pay his mortgage. He didn't have the money to live because he lived well outside of his means, but yet he was channeling the divine information. He was channeling the divine cue. He took the cue drop seriously, rather. He was channeling Archangel Michael. He was Edgar Casey. His sources in the invisible letter groups were totally trustworthy, etc., etc., etc. He had built this huge following, this massive conference following, massive YouTube channel on, like most of them, profound truths mixed with lies and grifts. So, let the end of the flesh sack we call David WILCOCK be a lesson to you. Never, ever take the voices, whether we're talking derogatory or commanding, ultimatum insisting voices, the fearful voices, and he was also growing in paranoia and fear. They're going to get me, which can lead to them getting you if you're a well-known public speaker, obviously, too. I mean, the paranoia can be a self-fulfilling prophecy for someone with a huge following telling the truth. Don't let it happen to you. Don't take yourself so seriously. And it's sad because as a Pisces zodiac sun sign, you'd think he'd recognize what the Buddhists call, the porous nature of your mind, that it's your mind is a radio receiver set, they also said. You'd think he'd know that he was more of an artist, more of a enigmatic presenter, more of a book writer, and not a serious scientist like Cassidy claims, not a person who is the channel of truth. So, yeah, it's really sad that it led to this, but it seemed to me that David WILCOCK had been taken over by the false self voices of Archangel Michael, the Elohim, or whatever name you want to give it, for years. That David WILCOCK had spiritually died or left for probably multiple years before this happened. So, let this be a lesson to anyone who takes The false self introjects to be the voices of God or the divine. It's not. It's the voices of the violent, killer, usurper, false self-god, loose farmers. And yeah, if at all possible, create the peace in your existence in the flesh sack. Have the deep discernment so that this cannot happen to you. Recognize the difference between you and your false self killer gods.